you're not sure what your superpower is, ask those around you because everybody else does. Sales professionals are definitely professional interviewees. They sell themselves every day, right? So they know how to put themselves together so that they stand out. And so you really have to dig. If you're not in the situation that you thought you'd be in,
Hmm.
just take 30 minutes and get quiet with yourself and like, what do you really believe your superpower is? And then I would say if you're in misalignment, then be brave and take a risk. Sales is all about psychology. So if you haven't figured out that and you're not listening to psychology type podcasts or reading psychology type books, then you've missed a little bit of information there that's probably going to be valuable.
This is the Relentless Pursuit of Winning podcast, where we are here to educate, equip, and inspire people to build extraordinary companies. We're so glad you're here. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you can get updates every time we drop a new episode. Now let's get it started. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Relentless Pursuit of Winning podcast. My name is Rick Meekins. I'm going to be your host for today. And in the studio, we have Kristie K. Jones. Welcome to the studio.
Rick, thanks so much for having me on. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know what, folks? If you haven't done it already, I would love it if you would like, subscribe, hit the bell so you get updates every time we drop a new episode. And without further ado, let's get it started. So, Kristie, would you do us a favor and tell us about yourself, who you are, what you do, and why you do what you do?
Of course, I'm Kristie Jones. I run the Sales Acceleration Group. I have been helping B2B startup founders since 2016 formalize and document all sales processes. I help them hire sales members for their team, both net new and customer success, SDRs, leaders. And then I do a little side hustle of fractional leadership, a little side hustle of executive coaching in the spare time. Why do I do what I do? I've got a soft spot for those type of founders. My parents owned a real estate franchise when I was growing up. And so the small business world was something I grew up in. And so I have a really soft spot in my heart for those people who mortgage their house and put it up so that they can get some money and, really do the highest risk thing you can do, which is start and own your own business.
Yeah, that part right there. I just got a newsletter from a lady who was talking about, it's like, yes, one of my goals for this year is to pay down my business debt. It's just like, that part.
Yeah, that part. Right.
And then she also talked about having to take her medication and handle mental health issues. Like, that part too.
Yeah, right. All of that.
Now, what got you into your business? How did you end up starting your company?
I ended up starting my company after I lost my job as a sales leader at a B2B SaaS startup. And I really went in search of my next sales leadership gig. And in doing some networking with people, I say the universe conspired to put me into running my own business, which was a terrible joke because I had told anybody who would listen after watching my father go through a bunch of tried and true turmoils around the real estate business, which, as you know, has its ups and downs. I had told anybody who would listen that I would never own my own business. I thought it was a horrible idea. And in networking with a bunch of different people to try to find my next opportunity, those opened up doors that I never expected. And it became very clear that the universe wanted me to consult for B2B SaaS startup founders and help others the way my family was helped out from time to time with our business. And so I always say, when the universe speaks, you better listen. And so it became very apparent to me that this was the path I was supposed to take. And almost 10 years later, here I am.
So, wow, 10 years later, that's impressive. It's
Thank
like sometimes it's just like the universe is talking and you're just kind of like, okay, I guess it wasn't talking.
No, the universe was definitely talking to me before I had gotten 3 months. I was going to get 3 months severance. If I
Hmm.
stayed on for 3 months, they were transitioning my sales team from St. Louis to Phoenix and putting it under the marketing umbrella from the sales umbrella. And so most of my team was also losing their jobs as well. And so if I kept the boat afloat while they rebuilt it in Phoenix, they would pay me 3 months severance was the deal we had in place. And before I ever left, before those 3 months were up, I had clients 1 and 2 for my was turning into a consulting business. And in the first year, I doubled my income.
Nice. Very nice. Very nice. That's awesome. That's awesome. That's inspiring. For somebody listening to the show or watching the show, what's the most important thing you want them to get out of watching or listening to it?
I think I want you to understand what I call your superpowers, right? I want you to understand what you do better than other people and then how to leverage that to make sure that you can own your own income, own your own life, fulfill the dreams that you have. But I think too many people are reactive about their career, particularly in sales. I say we spend all of this time outbound prospecting and targeting our ideal customer profile and making sure that we're doing research and we're doing, custom and personalized messages. And then when it comes to our own career, a recruiter calls up and says, "Oh my gosh, I have the perfect opportunity for you." And we go, "Okay." And the next thing you know, we've left the current job. We've started a new job at a company that we weren't even pursuing. And so, I want people to be proactive with their career instead of stop being reactive, stop, in some cases being a victim of circumstances and, come up with your own ICP, your ideal company profile and go after those, go after the company that you think best fits your superpowers. I think a lot of people struggle because they're in a bad fit job situation.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. 100%. Let's talk about superpowers. Dive in. Let's tell me more. I'm interested.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I think that superpowers are different than strengths, right? So, but almost all superpowers started out as strengths, but then you have to develop them. You have to hone them. You have to pressure test them under the worst circumstances. And so, if you want to take a strength to a superpower, it's a deliberate act. You have to make a decision to do so. You have to, in some cases, hire a coach or get mentors or, form a circle. You're going to have to put practice time in. These things, I mean, if you look at the best of anything in the world, whether that be athletes, CEOs, government officials, people are putting time in, right? It doesn't, I mean, you may have some natural talent, which got it to be a strength, but in order to get it to the next level, to get it to a superpower, you're going to have to invest some time and energy, and maybe even some money. And so, what are you willing to do? What are you not willing to do? But I use this example. I'm a tennis player, but I grew up playing racquetball. I was a highly competitive junior racquetball player, had a sponsorship with Head. And then at some point in my mid 20s, late 20s, I decided I wanted to switch to tennis. And so as a result, I have a natural slice in tennis, which most people who start playing tennis in their late 20s would not have. But I already had the muscle memory from racquetball. But in order to really put it into play in tennis, I already had developed it and intentionally. But in order to hone it, I would spend time at what I called the wall. It was a 2-story side of a high school gymnasium that was brick. And so I would spend 30 minutes, over the summers, 5 days a week, trying to hone that so it would be really slick and nasty, so it would move. And so, that became, most people, words out on the street of me here in St. Louis, but most people know that when they get across from me across the net, they know that the slice is coming. And they know that I spend a lot of time honing it and then, making sure I could pressure tested it, which means I need to be able to be comfortable putting into play when I'm down in the set or I'm down in the tiebreak, or I know that my team needs my court in order to win the match. I have to be comfortable and I guess take a risk putting it in play, and then leveraging it would be, leveraging your superpower is what's the circumstances under which your superpower is going to best play. So for me, my slice plays best against a top spin person. So when the ball comes over, towards me, I can pick the spot I want to hit it if they have top spin. The thing I don't want to see on the court is slice. So if the person across from me has slice, slice doesn't like slice. So in that case, I've also spent a little bit of time. I wouldn't say it's a strength, but I can get away with a little bit of top spin. So you have to really understand all of those things. But I think the thing that I shared with people is, I took a strength, I made it a superpower by putting in the time and, spending time with a coach over one summer, 1 hour a week in lessons, but I had to spend 3 or 4 times that at the wall in order to make sure that it just came naturally to me, right? It wasn't something I have to think about. I don't have to think about my form or my footwork. Muscle memory has kicked in at that point. And so, I say to people, where's the mental memory for you, right? If this, then that. And so with a superpower that you have, like, let's say in business, then you automatically, if you see this scenario, you automatically do this. If this shows up, then this is what I do. And it becomes mental memory where there's no need to stop and think about what I do next.
So in your case, in business as a consultant or as a sales leader, I mean, what was your superpower? How did you discover it?
Yeah, I don't think I knew my superpowers until I was in my 40s, which is why I'm talking about it to everybody who will listen, because I'm like, the sooner you figure it out, the better life gets.
Yeah.
I have 2 superpowers. My professional superpower is my natural curiosity, which then leads to questioning. My son calls me nosy. I prefer naturally curious. But I want to know everything about everything. I'm a lifelong learner. And I think that's my superpower in business. Obviously, I also had to learn active listening, but the person asking questions is always in control of the call, as you know. as the podcast host. And then my universal superpower is generosity. My motto is I have
Interesting.
30 minutes for everyone. And I believe that if you do the right things will happen. And in my case, I spend, I say the 30 minutes for everyone. Most people will take me up on that around people who have lost their jobs, who need me to review their resume, maybe help them prep for the big interview, or maybe I know somebody and there's somebody in my network that can help.
Hmm.
And so I truly believe that the give back that I do on the regular, the universe will take care of me. That's, I just believe that if I'm doing the right things, and I think the right thing is to help people who maybe didn't grow up in a family that like I did with, I left that the nest with business acumen and financial acumen. And, not everybody grew up in that situation. Money was a very transparent topic at my house. So I have no fear of discussing money with anybody. And so I feel like, when I've grown up in a situation that maybe other people haven't, and I got to see people starting a business, and then running a business firsthand, that I probably know things that other people don't. And it's my responsibility to share my knowledge.
Love that. I love that. I thought you were going to say sales, or leadership or something like that. So you threw me off. So that said, so generosity was a strength of yours. You developed into a superpower. How did you do that?
Yeah, like I said, I think I came late to the game, and it really wasn't until I lost my job that I realized that generosity had been my superpower for a very long time, but I had never leveraged it or honed it. But when I lost my job and I started to reach out to folks, people were like falling over themselves to help. In fact, the reason I started my business was because, two very specific things happened. In fact, the owner that I had worked for 10 years in his SaaS business, I had helped him take his SaaS, more than double his SaaS revenue over a 10-year period of time. He made two introductions to me, and one became a client. The other was a managing partner at a VC, and he introduced me to client number one. And the other introduction from my former employer became client number three. And then a partner that was a resale partner at that organization became client number two. And so, I didn't realize that people, again, people weren't going out of their way to help me if I wasn't asking. So I did have to ask, but a lot of people are afraid to ask. And then, once I realized that I had been doing my motto had always been do the right things and the right things will happen. And I have 30 minutes for everyone.
Hmm.
Once I realized that those things that I think were just innate, traits that I learned growing up
Hmm.
were actually benefiting me personally and professionally, I started to make a very conscious effort, right? And so I started telling more people that I have 30 minutes for everyone. And I started inserting myself in ways, being maybe more assertive about that and saying, hey, like, just send me your resume. Like, let me look at it.
Mm.
And then people would just reach out to me. They're like, well, I was talking to Bobby and he said that I should talk to you. And so I think as far as leveraging it, like I try to mention this on podcasts when I'm there. I try to tell my clients about that. And even, after clients become former clients, I often take calls from founders with just like, hey, like, can I run this by you? And just, does this make sense? I
Oh
don't
yeah.
charge anybody for that, right? I just think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Wow. So you talked about your helping salespeople figure out kind of what their ICP is, figure out their superpower looks like. What does that process look like in particular with the ICP? I mean, understanding like the type of company that they really want to be able to work with and how
Yeah,
it's
I
going to
have
be fit.
Yeah, several criteria for that. I call them levers. What type of for first off, I don't think everybody really understands the number of different types of sales roles out there, right?
Mm,
So, you think about hunters and farmers, but what about inside versus outside? What about selling a product versus a service?
yeah.
What about do you want to sell into the SMB market, the mid market? Do you want to sell enterprise? Do you want to sell a product, a service, or software? Like, there's so many things. So first off, like, where's your sales superpower lie in that? And then what industry do you want to sell into? What types of people do you want to sell to? What type of company do you want to work with or work for? What type of boss do you want, right? What do you want your leader to look like? And I mean, just like we would say to a startup founder, you need to write your ICP down, your ideal customer profile. Like, you need to have a written ICP. I think sales professionals in particular, and anybody looking for a job, like, what's the ideal situation for you? Where do you think, I tell people, I go, if you don't like, maybe the healthcare industry is something that you're really passionate about for whatever reason, but maybe
Hmm.
manufacturing isn't. Right. So I think the industry, I don't think people spend enough time
Mm,
thinking about the industry they're selling
yeah,
into, and then the persona or the person within those industries that they're going to be spending the most time with.
yeah,
If you're an outgoing, gregarious person, you're probably not going to want to sell to the finance department.
yeah.
Right? mean, you'd probably rather sell to the HR department, or you'd rather sell to the marketing department or the sales department as opposed to the IT department or the finance department or the operations department. I don't think people are spending enough time thinking about that. So I really, when working with people, particularly when they're looking for a job, I just did this the other day. I had been one of my first fractional clients. One of the employees has left. And she reached out and said, "Hey, do you have 30 minutes?" I said, "Well, of course, I do." And so she sent me her resume up front, but she had been a hunter for a long time, but had recently in the last 3 or 4 years transitioned into the customer success role. And so one of the first things I said to her is, "I think you're qualified for both. And I bet you think you're qualified for both, but where does your true superpower lie?" And she said, "I think it's in farming. I think it's an expansion," because she has that hunter mentality. So she said, "I don't have any problem asking for money, getting the renewal, or asking for more money and getting the expansion."
Yeah.
And so, I think the more you know yourself and and you're asking yourself those type of questions, the more likely it is that you'll land the right sales role that will help you get to the top 10%. So
Yeah.
the other thing I say to people is, if you're not sure what your superpower is, not just sales superpower, but if you're not sure what your superpower is,
Hmm.
ask those around you because everybody else does.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, like, what do you do better than your coworkers? What comes easily to you? What is natural? What seems to come natural for you, but is really hard for other people? Where are you passionate? Where do you feel like time just flies when you're doing X activity or you're doing, whatever it is? I always say, like, I'm a water baby. So, when I'm out on the lake, I'm just like, oh my gosh, it's already 7. Like we got out there at 11 and all of a sudden it's like time to go in for dinner. And I'm like, what do you mean? We just got out here. No, because that's my happy place. That's my
Hmm.
special place. And the time it just evaporates. And so, what are you doing when time evaporates for you like that, where
Mm.
you're like, oh my gosh, it's time to shut it down and, make dinner or go get some, go meet the friends for happy hour. So I think, like people, we spend so much time, particularly in sales, doing all of these right things to bring the right prospects into our organization and make them customers, but we don't take all of the same skills and techniques that we're using on a day-to-day basis professionally to apply them to our own personal career.
Yeah. Interesting. I was actually speaking to someone. I think it was yesterday, day before yesterday. She's a marketer, and she's been out of work for, I don't know, 3 6 months, something like that. And I said to her, it's like, why don't you just go to companies and just pitch yourself, with the understanding that, hey, they're reaching a growth inflection point, but it doesn't look like they have a marketer, on staff.
Mhm.
You mentioned something similar. You were saying something to the effect of sales teams or sales individuals need to sell themselves to companies. How is that different from just interviewing?
It's proactive versus reactive. The majority of people who are looking for jobs or out of work and looking for jobs or unhappy or looking for jobs are, going to LinkedIn, to Indeed, they're putting their resume, they're putting open to work on their LinkedIn profile. That's a reactive strategy, right? So you're scouring through hundreds of job postings and applying to, I'm talking, I snoop around on Reddit, so I'm a stalker on Reddit, mostly the sales channels, because what you're hearing on LinkedIn is not what you're hearing on Reddit. And what you just said, I've been talking more and more about. It used to be that if you lost your job, you could probably find one in 3 months.
Yeah.
And now it's 6 months.
Yeah.
Right. And so, just like years and years and years ago, I can't remember where I heard this, but somebody said, one of the number one sales or one of the number one jobs that a sales leader has is always be recruiting, right? Always be looking for the next A player. And again, I'm not saying if you're happy in your job, you need to be out there looking for your next employer. But you don't know for no fault of their own. I'm about to make a offer this afternoon to an AE for a client of mine, and that person is employed, but half the people I interviewed got to the final stage of the interview were unemployed, and had been out of work somewhere between 3 and 6 months. And so, you should always be, your resume should always be up to date. You should always be networking. You should be, keeping your ear to the ground and saying to people like, hey, this is the circumstance under which I might consider leaving. Right? Your ideal company profile, your ideal industry in the right industry, the right type of sales role, selling the right thing, working for the right people. So, what does that look like? And there's no harm in putting that out into the universe, because who knows what may show up at your door.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Absolutely. So you work on both sides, though. So it sounds as though you work on both sides. So you work with sales professionals that are looking for work, but you also recruit and, I'm assuming, put sales teams together. Is that right?
I do. Yeah. The helping the individual sales reps who might be out of work is my volunteerism, my give back, if you will.
Got it.
And then one of the services that I offer is I call it hiring help. So my team and I, we are not a staffing company. We don't source, we don't charge a percentage of base salary. We literally project manage the hiring process from start to finish. The majority of startup founders are tech founders. And so hiring a salesperson not only is terrifying, but risky for them because they don't know what we know. I've hired hundreds and hundreds of sales reps over my years. And so we do everything from write the job description to the offer letter and stick around for the first 2 weeks of onboarding. So we never leave my client alone with the candidate. We don't trust them to not screw it up. So we like resumes come to us. We phone, we scan them. We do it by hand. We don't use AI. We manually go through every single resume that comes through the door. We phone screen them. We pick the ones that we're going to do a formal interview with. And then one of my team members or myself, we lead that interview with the client.
Mhm.
And then, we do assessments. We lead those post-assessment interviews. We do final interviews. So really, yeah, we do everything so that, particularly because of the world I live in, if you're hiring sales rep one or two or customer success rep one or two, it's a risk for both, right? Hiring sales rep number one is the hardest thing that I do. And it's also the riskiest thing that the founder will do. And so that's a special person that can come in under that circumstance where maybe you've, just hit the $1 million mark and got $7 million in VC backing. And the minute you do that, the VC is like, stop playing sales rep. We do a lot of founder led selling initially. Stop playing sales rep and build out your sales team, but they don't know how to do that. They've never done that before. And leaving that to their own devices, will probably put them in a situation where they may mishire.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's interesting. I see, founders getting to a point where they're not really sure when to make that jump off.
Mhm.
And they're out there, they're making the calls, but they're not necessarily making that connection that, hey, your time is valuable in this other area of the business. How do you coach people in that space as well?
Yeah, actually, I do a lot of speaking at startup weeks across the country, and I have a breakout session that I do called "Moving from Founder-Led Selling to Hiring Your First Sales Rep," and I provide a checklist of all the things that need to really be in place before you can do that. And I think a lot of the reasons why that rep number one fails is that the founder has used their what I'll call personal Rolodex. 'Cause I'm old enough to use the Rolodex word. They use their personal Rolodex to sell those first few deals, but they've never done it the way that the AE is going to have to do it.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Because the AE doesn't have the personal Rolodex that the founder has. And so you have to go beyond just so yes, congratulations, you've sold deals to your personal Rolodex. But we need a tried and true process, which is why I spend most of my time initially with founders putting together and documenting all the formal, making formal all the processes that need to happen. Here's what the steps are going to look like. And we can't just use the Rolodex as the example because that's a different type of relationship. And so if we're going to do cold outbound, which is where most of the startups I work with are going to start, we have to have, a formula for that. And so putting that together is really important. And I say like, one of the things I say tongue in cheek, but not so really is, if you're not really ready to hand over the baby to the adoptive parents and let them raise the baby the way they want to raise it, then you're not ready to hire a sales professional.
Well said.
Yeah, I mean, you can get pictures at Christmas and birthdays and holidays, but you need to let them raise the baby. And one of the things that that I warn founders about when I come in to do this is, hey, they're not you. They didn't build the product. This isn't their baby. They did not give birth to it like you did, so they're not going to feel the same way about it that you do. And they're not going to sell it the way you sold it because they don't know everything that you know, right? And so, founders sometimes will call me 3 months later and they're like, nothing, this isn't happening or they're not doing it the way I did it. And I said, I know, because you sold to friends and family and they're going to have to do the really hard thing, which is sell to strangers. So we need to cut them some slack, but we can't just come in and this can't just be on the job training, right? We need to have, formalization around process and strategy so they have some sort of a playbook to follow.
Interesting, interesting. So I've heard sales pros come in, like consultants like yourself come into companies where they're hiring that first, or I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. Talking about founders who bring in that first sales rep with the expectation that that sales rep or that sales professional can build that sales arm of the company. Is how realistic is that?
Not. It's not, because
Well,
the
that was
first
clear.
no, not realistic, and that's what I say to them, listen, 'cause, back in the day in VCs, the VCs made me mad, because VCs would tell them, like, you need a sales director, or you need a VP of sales, or you need whatever. No,
Right.
you need an IC, you need an individual contributor, right? An individual contributor so, I mean, like, at some point, you had a choice as you're coming up in sales to either go the sales leadership route
Hmm.
or stay the IC route,
Hmm.
and if you've been doing this for 10 years and you're in the IC seat, you made a conscious choice before that to not go down the sales leadership path. And so a sales leader should be responsible for processes, documentation, formalization, the playbook, all of that.
Hmm.
But we should not be asking an IC to do that. The ICs just want to just give me the playbook. give me some advice, wind me up, and push me in the right direction. And that's why the first thing I do, so a lot of times I do get calls from founders who said, hey, I've been founder-led selling. I got $2 million. Now I got my 7 million in VC backing. And I'm ready to hire and I'm like more than done with playing sales rep. So I want to hire my first sales rep. And I said, great. So let's talk about what you have written down, all of the things that you learned in your best practices from you got yourself to $1 million. So that's a huge accomplishment for a tech founder, right? Someone who doesn't have a sales or marketing background. So you did a phenomenal job. How much of that is written down? And that's when they go, oh. And I said, okay, well, then the first thing we're going to do is you're going to hire me to help you build out the sales playbook. And I'm going to spend 6 to 8 weeks quizzing you and taking everything you learn and getting it out of your head and getting it on a paper so that we can turn around. I go, you have a successful formula, albeit perhaps the Rolodex helped a little bit more. But that is another question that I ask him is, have you done anything outside of the Rolodex? Have you successfully sold from a cold outreach? Because that's what this person's going to have to do.
But what about that founder that's done like all of their sales like through networking? They're going to networking events and they're meeting people, they're talking to people, they build out their multi-million-dollar business that way. They don't have a formal sales process. How do you work with those folks, or how do you advise those folks?
Yeah, I mean, in some cases, it really depends on how far they've been able to go with that. Then I would say maybe you can stop being the sales professional, but continue being the evangelist, right? I mean, I remember working for an organization where we had 2 evangelists, people who were experts in the industry, that believed in our product, and we hired them then as employees and let them go around the country doing speaking engagements, breakout sessions, keynotes, doing lunch and learns. We would do these regional events where we would bring people in, and so that is a fabulous way to get really warm leads, right? And I said I would much rather, when we talk about going to trade shows and conferences, I'm not going to say don't, but I'm pretty anti-booth because I said, it would be much better for you to send an evangelist, whether that be the founder, the CEO, the CMO, whoever that would be. It would be much better for you to send somebody who's an industry expert who has some street cred and give them a breakout session, get them to do a breakout session and get 35 people who voluntarily raised their hands and walked into that room instead of any of the other breakout sessions that were available at 10 o'clock in the morning. I'd rather have 35 of those people and 250 scans or 2,500 scans after 3 days of people who are not our ICP. And now we've just wasted the sales team's time going through garbage leads. And even worse, we put them in the CRM system.
Yeah. I was
So,
going to my next
I think if that's your thing, if that's your thing and you've been able to build a really nice business that way, then don't stop that strategy, right?
Yeah.
But we can run 2 strategies simultaneously. It would be fabulous to get in. Every sales rep would love to have qualified inbound leads. No one's going to turn that down. But I always say, be careful about inbound because that means there's a difference between them picking you and you picking them, right? People picking you, finding you on the internet, through paid ads or social or whatever, that most of inbound leads are not your ICP. So be careful be wary of ICP. The only way you can get ICP truly is by going outbound and you picking who you want to call based on data and research.
Yeah. That makes sense. And we were talking earlier about that building out your sales team. We talked about bringing in that first sales pro, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things that I think when we talked earlier, you talked about the professional interviewers. And I remember myself, interviewing a person and just saying, you're a really good interviewer. What's your experience? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, sales professionals are definitely professional interviewees. So I say buyer beware. They sell themselves every day, right? So they have no qualms about doing that with you. They know how to put their resume together so it looks it stands out. Then they put themselves together so that they stand out. And so you really have to dig. This is where I have a technique I teach just in general with sales professionals called the question on a question technique, which is we start with a pretty broad question. And the broad question that I start with people that I'm interviewing is, tell me about the last position that you held and walk me through the sales process from start to finish. Because one of the things that's really important to me with my startup founders and hiring sales rep 1 or 2 is that something they've done in the past very much mirrors what our process is going to be. Because the last thing I want to do, I'm happy to teach them the industry and the product, the software, but I don't want to have to teach them a new sales process. So I want it to be similar in nature. So I start with this really broad question. And then I said, well, okay. So then they walk me through it and I go, okay, well, tell me more about the discovery. What type of questions do you ask? Tell me about the demo. How long does that last? How are you making that interactive? So then I start digging down and digging and digging. And the same thing with just numbers, right? So, very few reps. Under 50% of sales professionals are hitting quota. right now and have been hitting quota for the last few years. And so, but you would be surprised at the number of resumes I see where they're exceeding quota. And I was like, well, if everybody's exceeding quota, why do the stats tell us that only 47% of sales reps are hitting quota? So those kind of things you've got to really dig into, right? So tell me about how you got to that number. Tell me what you did. Tell me what average sale was. Tell me about the number of deals. How many coworkers did you have? Where did you rank? Right? Because I said to people, I go, if the company, we give a lot of really bad quotas. Again, I'm back to the bad VCs again. I'm on the bad VC program today. But they give, I mean, they want their money back. And so they set these unrealistic revenue targets for startups.
Right.
And then we have to pass that number on, right? So it rolls downhill, as you know. So all of a sudden, a sales professional ends up with an unrealistic quota, either because average sale is too high or close rate needs to be too high, or just the number itself is just unrealistic based on the life cycle or where they're at in the life cycle stage of the company. And so it's okay to tell me, I would rather you tell me I hit 73% of quota, but I was the number one rep. What that tells me is the revenue target was unrealistic. And there are a lot of unrealistic revenue targets that are out there. So I'd rather people be honest with me and say, so that's what I'm trying to get to, right? At some point, I say, hey, listen, as the number one rep, what set you apart from other people? What were you doing differently? And then, hey, was that number even realistic? And did you really get to 86% or did you really get to 73%? And I'm fine. Again, I want people, I want people whose ethics are high and I want people who are authentic. And I'd much rather hear you say, I was the number one rep and I still only got to 73%.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. That makes sense. That makes sense. What was a challenge that you had in building a sales team, and how'd you get past it? How'd you get over it? How did you
I
become
think
successful?
Yeah, I mean, anytime that you build, again, and only one time in my entire career did I actually get an opportunity to build a sales team from zero,
Hmm.
which is a very unusual proposition. But I was able to build a team from 0 to 13 over 3 months. And a lot of times you inherit people. You've acquired somebody you did not hire and might not have hired had it been your choice. But I think one of the things that I think is important. I speak a lot about creating an accountability culture.
Hmm.
And I speak about this mostly with sales because sales is an objective sport, right? There's zero subjectivity in sales. How you go about getting to the objectivity is where the subjective part comes in. But in general, I'm big on creating a culture of accountability and holding a people accountable. It would be nice if other departments, everybody was on the same program because a lot of times it's easy to hold salespeople accountable because all of the measurements are very objective.
Hmm.
But in order to hold somebody accountable, you can't hold them accountable if you haven't been very clear and put in writing what your expectations are of them. Right? You can't just say, I'm expecting you to hit $850,000 in quota this month. Well, how many deals is that? What do you expect the average sale to be? How long do you think it should take them for a deal to go from start to finish?
Hmm.
How many demos do they need to do? How many discovery calls do they need to do? So you've got to break it down into what I call everybody's personal sales math. And so I think in order to have a successful sales team, you have to, I mean, we need, if you're trying to find one of the mistakes, particularly the world I live in, they're like, well, let's just hire somebody really experienced, then we won't have to train them. You always have to provide professional development, right? People
Hmm.
should be doing their own. I'm looking for lifelong learners as well, people who are going to help their own professional development along the way. But
Hmm.
it's our responsibility as sales leaders to teach the art of sales. The
Hmm.
world right now is helping out big time with the science of sales,
Hmm.
right? Data's everywhere, AI's everywhere, automation's everywhere. So the science of sales part is almost taken care of. But as a result of that, I'm seeing the art of sales go extinct. Sales leaders are coming up in the art of sales, not being taught the art or coming up in the science of sales, not being taught the art of sales themselves, which means they can't turn around and we can't teach the next generation the art of sales if
Hmm.
you come up and all you learned was the science of sales. And
Hmm.
so I think, hiring the right people, meaning fit, right? Meaning, should they be selling into that industry? Should they be selling $1,000 average sale product? Should they be selling something that takes 3 months to close? Like, really matching the current process and what the reality of the situation is with
Hmm.
what they've done in the past and what they're capable of doing. And then we have to continually provide them professional development and coaching. We have to listen to calls, sit in on calls, watch demos, and give them feedback. And then before all of that, we have to clearly outline what is expected of them. And then I say to people, I go, the piece that most people miss is what are the consequences for not hitting expectations?
Hmm.
And we should be telling them that up front. Just like I believe that we should tell the prospect on the first call, if we continue to play together, this is what our process looks like. Like, why would we hide our sales process from the prospect? Why wouldn't we want them to know what the steps are going to be along the way so they know how close we are to the end?
Yeah.
So you have to say like, hey, and if these things aren't met, this is what the process will look like, right? Whether that's a verbal corrective action or written corrective action, whether that's, under what circumstances might termination occur, so you have to have consequences. I think, as someone who's led people in your past as well, there's nothing more frustrating for the employees than to see someone who's not hitting expectations and nothing happens to them when everyone else is busting their ass
Yeah.
to make sure that they're doing what's being asked of them.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. You've talked about experienced salespeople. Under what conditions would you hire, a junior?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's a little risky for the world that I live in, but there are times when financially we just don't have a choice, right? We have to hire somebody whose base salary is going to be a little lower than an experienced salesperson is going to, take on. And so, under that circumstance, we just have to be fully prepared to level them up, right? What do they know? What do they not know? I mean, I ask every candidate, tell me about formal sales trainings that you've been provided by former employers. And the number one answer I get is I haven't, right? I've been given product training. I've been given some sort of a framework, but I've never had either formal methodology training or art of sales training, as I call it. And so if we're going to bring on someone more junior, I think there's pluses and minuses to this because they're still kind of wide-eyed and bushy-tailed, right? So,
Hmm.
and they may not have been mistrained, right? We might get to be the first person to provide them sales training and provide it the way that we, make sure that we can get them the proper sales training that they need. But I think you just have to be prepared that they're going to need more coaching. They're going to need more formal processes, more documentation. They're going to need, to have a clear path about how this works, and then need a lot more feedback than maybe someone who's more senior. But there are a lot of reasons, mostly financial, where you'd want to bring in someone more junior. And I think even like if we find I say to people a lot, I just came off this hiring project where I had to tell two people, hey, if we were further along and we weren't trying to hire sales rep number one, we would take a chance on you, right? But it just doesn't quite fit closely enough. It's just too much of a risk for us right now. But if we were looking for sales rep number three, we wouldn't have any problem bringing you on because we already have two other people doing it the way we want to do it. We've got the process underway. But with sales rep number one, it's just a little trickier.
Yeah. Yeah. What makes it a little trickier?
Well, neither people really know what they don't know. And when we're still in that stage, like, so the company doesn't really know things like, hey, do I have the pricing right? Hey, do I have the go to market strategy right? Hey, have I really picked the right ICP for this? Like, if you've just gotten to the $1 million mark, you're somewhere between 1 million and 5, you're still probably doing some beta testing out there about different things like, hey, we're going to start with healthcare, but we also think this could work for manufacturing or financial services or, accountants or lawyers. And so you're not really, like there's still a lot of new and a lot of testing that goes on. So, sales professional number one has to have a very high risk profile and has to be flexible. So I say you need to be more willow than oak. So
Mm.
if you're an oak tree and you need an employee handbook, which probably doesn't exist right now,
Mhm.
you need a dress code or if you need a lot of formality. I interviewed one person the other day and they had had a lot of corporate, like Fortune 500 corporate experience.
Mhm.
And I said, hey, like we're the anti 500, right? Like you have a process and a document for everything, right? At Google, at IBM, at wherever. I said, we have the basics. We have the basics outlined. We have a playbook, but it's 20 pages, not 120 pages. We have not accounted for everything yet because we're not putting everything in writing just yet because we're not really sure that it's formalized yet. So I think you need to be, and again, for the right person, Rick, this is a very exciting opportunity, right? If you're somebody who who gets bored easily or who has an inventive mind and an entrepreneurial mindset and love being, I interviewed one of the girls for this project and she said, I'm a pioneer. And I was like, well, that's spot on, right? I mean, I'd never heard anybody describe it the way. She's like, yep,
Mhm.
I'm a pioneer. And I'm like, well, we need pioneers. That's what we need, right?
Mhm.
And so if you have that kind of mindset, a startup is a fabulous place for you. But if you don't like change and you like knowing what the day's going to be like before you walk in the door every day, we're probably not for you.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense. Cool. Hey, did you want to talk about your book?
I would love to talk about my book.
Let's
Uh,
talk about your book. What made you write a book?
Awesome. For the same reason that we talked about kind of early on in the podcast, I felt like I was seeing more and more sales professionals pick the wrong role for themselves, and as a result, struggle to get to the top 10%, or either drop out of sales because they thought sales wasn't for them, but really they had just picked the wrong sales role for them. And if they picked the right role, they'd probably still be in sales. Or people who were just constantly frustrated and struggling because they could not get themselves to the top of the totem pole. And so I decided to write a book. It's called Selling Your Way In, the playbook for setting your income and owning your life. And we spend a third of the book talking about what you and I spoke at the beginning of the podcast about figuring out what your sales superpower is, what is your swim lane, what type of sales role should you have, selling into what industry. So all the things I talked about early on, I put in the book, and I give you a questionnaire to ask you a bunch of questions to kind of help you figure some of this out. And then in the second section of the book, I talk about once you understand all of that, then you can go into a lot of organizations, understand their formal process, but then, like I said, leverage your superpowers. Where are you going to leverage your superpowers, right? I'm a naturally curious person who asks a lot of questions. So I normally shine in the discovery part of the sales cycle, right? I'm not a strong, I don't like, I'm not a hard, I'm not a strong closer, but I'm not a pushy closer.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I believe in fit. So I believe that if what your problem is something that I have proven over and over again that I've solved for other people, and we think we can do the same for you, then I expect that close will just kind of come organically. And so I spend the second part just saying, hey, like, take the process that they've already honed and that they've already figured out,
Mm-hmm.
but figure out where you're going to spend the most time to leverage your sales superpower so that you can get the most out of that part of the sales cycle and put yourself in a better position to close the deal. And then the last section, as a former athlete and someone who spends a lot of time thinking about affirmations and afformations, positive self-talk on and off the court, the last part is all about the mental side of sales and how the people who are at the top 10% in almost any industry, get 8 hours of sleep, put the right things in their body, but don't put the wrong things in their body. Get there. I told you, I think maybe before we even started recording, that I started my day with a walk. I start most of my mornings with exercise and get it out of the way, so the day doesn't get in the way of taking care of my body. And that's it's not. I spend a lot of time on the physical, but not to neglect the mental. In fact, I just learned about a new, again, in interviewing, I always ask, candidates a bunch of questions that also benefit me. So I say like, hey, like what podcast do you listen to? What things you do? And she said, that she was really big into the mental game and that she had an app she uses for affirmations called I Am. So
Mm.
I immediately got off the interview with her and downloaded the I Am app. So I spend a lot of time talking about the mental side because if you fill your head with negativity, I'm also a big Brene Brown fan. And
Mm-hmm.
so I've taken a lot of what I learned from her. I've read every book. I've listened to her podcasts. I've listened to, The Power of Vulnerability more times than I can count. But I think, that those type of, when you like, I'm a student of more than just the sales game. I listen to a lot of sales podcasts, but I also listen to, My First Million. I also listen to Hidden Brain, podcast that I love, which is all around mental side of everything. And so I
Mm.
spend a lot of time listening to things outside of sales. First up, sales is all about psychology. So if you haven't figured out that and you're not listening to psychology type podcasts or reading psychology type books, then you've missed a little bit of information there that's probably going to be valuable. So I wrote the book to help either somebody who's trying to figure out what I would love is that everybody before they went into sales read the book and they would put themselves in the right position from the start,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they didn't have to take a bunch of bad sales jobs, but also for the people who are struggling and can't figure out why, Susan next to me is making twice as much money and I'm saying all the same things that Susan's saying.
Mm.
Well, maybe what you don't know is that, Susan doesn't drink. Susan doesn't eat red meat. She's a vegetarian. Susan, is a runner and she runs 5 miles a day. Susan surrounds herself with very positive people who are successful because your circle matters. So, I think sometimes people get frustrated and they don't understand, like, well, I'm saying what she's saying, but I'm not getting the results. Well, I say the work to get to the top actually happens outside of work, not
Yeah.
between 9 to 5.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. Awesome. Awesome.
Thanks.
You have a giveaway that you wanted to offer our audience. You want to talk about that?
I do. How to hire rock star talent. So if you're in the hiring, if you're looking for your next rock star, I wrote an ebook on the traits of rock star talented individuals. And so it will be at kristiekjones.com / I want to make sure I get your acronym right, RPOW. So kristiekjones.com / RPOW. And you can go, not gated, you can go and download the how to hire rock star talent. I also have one for individual contributors. So if you would like that ebook, go ahead and connect with me on LinkedIn. Tell me that you saw the podcast. Give me your one takeaway from the podcast and let me know you want that rock star takeaway, the top 10 traits of rock star talent. So see
Awesome.
how you can compare your traits to those who get to the top.
Awesome. 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 Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Is there something you want to leave our audience with?
I just think I would love for you to get quiet with yourself, right? Find some time and get quiet with yourself. For those of us, as you know, who own their own businesses, we spend a lot of time working in the business and not on the business. And I think a lot of individuals spend a lot of time working in something, but not on something. And so I would ask you to just get quiet with yourself. If you're not in a place where you love what you do, or you don't think you're making as much money as you can, or taking the kind of vacations or paying cash for college for your kids, if you're not in the situation that you thought you'd be in, where you know, in the place in your life that you are, just like take 30 minutes and get quiet with yourself. And like, what do you really believe in for you? What do you really believe your superpower is? Is that aligned with what you're doing today and the kind of company that you're working for and the kind of leader that you have? Or are you in misalignment? And then I would say, if you're in misalignment, then be brave and take a risk.
Very good, very good, very good. Kristie, thank you so much. Thank you for coming on the show. Enjoyed our talk.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Folks, thank you for watching or listening to another episode of the Relentless Pursuit of Winning podcast. We will catch you next time.